A few weeks back, Garmin announced a very nice update to their top-of-the-line triathlon watch, the Forerunner 955. But along with that update, Garmin also announced a very impressive update to their 200 series of watches, the all-new Forerunner 255. And although the 255 is as much as $250 less than the 955, it's still an extremely compelling watch for serious runners or triathletes. Both of these watches are very, very similar. Both watches have the same, swimming and biking and running functionality, even triathlon modes. Both watches have the same optical heart rate monitors on the back. They both have that pulse ox that can detect blood oxygen saturation. Garmin calls this, their Elevate 4.0 heart rate monitor. Both have the new heart rate variability tracking, and both watches have that new morning report feature so that you can check your suggested training or your previous night's sleep, as well as your heart rate variability data. And both watches have a very similar 1.3-inch transflective display, although the 955 is a touchscreen display, whereas the 255 is not a touchscreen, but it does come in one other size option. They have the 255S, which is slightly smaller, with a 1.1-inch display. And also, depending on which version of the 255, these two watches are very similar in weight. The non-solar 955 weighs in at 52 grams or 53 grams for the solar version, whereas the 255 weighs in at 49 grams. That smaller version, the 255S that I mentioned before, is a good bit lighter weight, weighing in at only 39 grams, and I could definitely see, size and weight definitely being a factor when you're picking between two watches like this, because the 955 really only has the one size. And, even though I have, wrists that are smaller than most normal 8-year-old girls, I personally like the size of the 255 and 955. The bigger 255 is 46 millimeters in diameter. The 955 is 46 and a half, so pretty much the same size there. And then that smaller 255S is 41 millimeters. And maybe this isn't important, but there's also some subtle design differences between the two watches. And I actually like the 255 a little bit more than the 955. The 955 comes in either a black or a white edition, but the 955 comes in a few more color options. That 255S, the smaller one, comes in a powder gray and a light pink. The larger 255 comes in tidal blue or slate gray. I actually have the slate gray. I really do like the way it looks. It has this little subtle red accent color to it, but the 955 is a little bit more bland in my opinion. For some reason, they felt the need to put the Forerunner name on the side casing of the plastic watch body. It's not something that you'll notice, but it's definitely not something that I like. I think I'm being a little bit picky here, but the actual watch straps are really similar. But the 255 actually has this little quick release strap, which is nice, whereas the 955 has the strap that you can remove, but they've made it almost impossible. You kind of have to dig something in there to try and get the pins out. I don't know, Garmin. I don't know why you did this. And then price-wise, the 255 and the 255S cost $350, which I actually think is a pretty good value for what you're getting with this watch. Each of those two sizes have music options for an extra $50, whereas the 955 cost $500. There's a solar edition of this watch as well that costs $600. And I should also say that both versions of the 955 models include music and music storage. And they have slightly more storage than the 255. The 255 music has 4 gigs of storage, whereas the 955 has 32 gigs of storage. So for example, you might be able to get about 500 songs on the 255 music, but you'd probably get as much as 2,000 songs on the 955. The 955 also has mapping, whereas the 255 does not. So, depending on what maps and what geo regions you have downloaded to the actual device, some of that extra storage capacity is going to be needed on the 955. The 255 does have navigation. It's just what they call breadcrumb navigation. It's still navigation, meaning it'll draw a line showing where you've been and where you're going, but it's not gonna show things like street names like it will on the 955. And then, when it comes to navigation and GPS accuracy, I've looked at a lot of data comparing these two watches, and they're both really fantastic. They both have that new multi-band GPS chipsets, meaning that, depending on the mode that you set, the watches can communicate with multiple GPS satellites at once, giving you, very precise GPS data. These two watches are, as accurate or, more accurate than anything else that I've tested on this channel. It's really quite amazing, but there's not a major difference between the two watches. But that GPS mode that you choose for each activity type does affect the battery life. For the 255, you can expect about 16 hours when you're using that, super accurate multi-band GPS mode, and about 30 hours if you set it in that more basic GPS settings. Whereas the 955 does a little bit better as far as overall battery life. It can go about 20 hours in that multi-band GPS mode and 42 hours in standard GPS, and that's for the non-solar version. Depending on solar conditions, you can expect, about a 10% bump in battery life if you have the solar edition of this watch. On either device, using music will also drain the battery quite a bit, and I would say you can probably expect about half of the battery life numbers that I mentioned before if you are using onboard music while you're doing GPS activities. And then, when I've been wearing these just, around the house, just like everyday smartwatch, I've been seeing about 2 weeks, on both of these watches. And then, of course, I don't personally have the solar variety of the 955, but depending on, how sunny it is where you live, you can probably expect as much as an additional week of battery life from that device. Now, I've already mentioned that the 255 doesn't have the same detailed mapping that the 955 has. The 255 is also missing something called training readiness score, which I think is a very nice metric. It's basically an overall score of how ready you are to do workouts. And the score is a combination of factors including sleep, your recovery from your previous workout, the acute training load that you've done, which is kind of like short-term training load, your just overall stress, as well as your HRV, the heart rate variability. And the 255 is also missing a new feature called real-time stamina. Basically, the 955 can display stamina, which is your short-term fatigue score, and something they call stamina potential, which is a longer-term fatigue score. And then the 255 is also missing Strava Live segments. It can't display advanced cycling dynamics, stuff like, left-right power balance. And then it doesn't have heat or altitude acclimatization details. So the 955 can do things like update you on how you're getting used to altitude or hotter climates. There's also no relaxation reminders on the 255. So, you're not gonna be able to relax with this 255 on. The 255 doesn't have Climb Pro, which is a very nice feature. It shows, details about upcoming hills when you're out cycling or you're running on a specific route that's inputted into the device. And then lastly, there's no golf or any golf metrics on the 255. So the Garmin Forerunner 255, it is missing a lot, and yet, I still do think it is a really fantastic option for, someone who doesn't want or need to spend more money on something like the 955. When it comes to just like the basics, swimming, biking, and running, I think that this watch is still really, really impressive. And it still does a lot of things that, most of the high-end watches are missing. Stuff like, tracking your heart rate variability, your sleep. It has that multi-band GPS for extremely accurate tracking. Personally, I think that the 255 is a really excellent option at $350. Is it as good as the 955? No, but I don't feel like I'm missing that much when I use this watch instead of the 955. But that's just me personally. And of course, I would much prefer to hear what you guys think. what would you go for? 955 or the 255? Let me know in the comment section below in this video. And of course, I will leave links to the full reviews of these videos here at the end of this video in case you want to dive into a particular watch in a lot more detail. But either way, be sure to get out there, swim, bike, run, rinse, and then repeat it all over again. And we will see you guys on the next one.